Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the session on smart mobility. My name is NILI. I'm from ISERD, from the Israel Innovation Authority. I'm working on cooperation activities between Israel and the EU in research and innovation, in transportation, aerospace, and advanced manufacturing. So I'm in this session today, we will conduct a dialogue between the EU and the Israeli government. We have two representatives, one from representing each government. So the two speakers are from the EU side. We have Mrs. Laura Hettel, who is a policy officer of urban mobility and systems in the Directorate General of Research and Innovation at the European Commission. Hello, Laura. Thank you for coming. And from the Israeli government, we have here Dr. Anat Bornstein, who is a chairwoman and director of the Smart Mobility Initiative at the Israel Prime Minister Office. Hello, Anat. Notice we are an all-women panel, which is, I vote for that. In the discussion today, our discussion on smart mobility today, will be held within the grand context of the EU Green Deal policy initiative, which you have all heard about during the last 2 hours. But more specifically, we will discuss mobility within the context of the EU Green Deal call in Horizon 2020, which will be published soon. And within this area of mobility, the call highlights specifically the importance of airports and ports hubs for sustainable and smart mobility as very important elements in driving the transition of Europe towards zero-emission transportation. So I would like first to turn to you, Laura. Could you please explain to us why the European Commission has chosen specifically airports and maritime ports as the focus of your research and innovation activities and investment in Green Deal this year?
Nili, I hope I managed to turn on my microphone and everybody can hear me. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I'm very glad to be talking to you about this new European Green Deal call, which is a bit of a departure from what we're doing in Horizon 2020, and at the same time anticipates very well what's going to happen in Horizon Europe. There's one thing that we were able to demonstrate in Europe in the past decades, and that's that since 1990, we were very successful at achieving economic growth while also reducing emissions. And you can see this change by sectors, right? You have the sector of electricity and heating, which is the main emitting sector for the EU, where we had a decrease of 25%. And then the list continues. There's a decrease of 26% for industry, for agriculture and waste, a decrease of 32%, for the building sector, a decrease of 24%, and so on. You're probably guessing at this point that I'm leaving out transport, because that is the only sector where not only we don't see a decrease, but we actually see an increase in emissions, and by a significant number, which is 23%. So we know we need fast action, and in this sector, we have fast deployment of solutions. Why airports and ports? It is mainly because they, on the European map of climate neutrality, they appear a little bit as black spots of carbon emissions and of pollution creations. But at the same time, we know they provide important services, right? 90% of the global trade takes place via waterborne transport. We know that traffic in aviation is expected to double by 2050. So there's an urgent imperative behind this, that these are two areas in which we should act. At the same time, we know that the technologies to enact change are already there. So what we need to do is take these technologies out of the labs, out of the last deployment and preparation stages, and insert them into an environment and make them work for cities and for the people. There's also demand on the sides of cities and ports in Europe. For example, more than 200 European airports have signed a pledge for zero net emissions by 2050. And we also know that we have the strong support from the European seaports organizations and other similar organizations in the field. Now, beyond these imperatives, in very, very practical terms, we also chose these spaces because of their very nature. We were looking specifically for experimentation hubs where we would have a large but a very contained and well-defined area, right? Where we would have simpler governance structures and where we could enact change in the life of the project, which will be between 48 and 60 months. At the same time, it was very important to also have wide spaces where you can experiment and play a little bit with technology without being necessarily disruptive of all the activity that is ongoing. Think, for instance, of the possibilities for the airports to install infrastructure that would provide their own renewable energy. At the same time, these are areas that are connected to the rest of the cities. And of course, the topic doesn't look at airports and ports in isolation. It looks at them as multimodal nodes that are very much linked to the rest of the cities and can enact change, starting not necessarily from the city towards the airport or the port, but also going backwards in the opposite direction, a little bit of counteracting pressure. Another important element would be that it encourages cooperation across the sectors. And I think if we want to achieve climate neutrality by 2050, if we want to accelerate the transition, this is the way to go. We cannot shy away from this anymore. And you can see how this topic is really different, from instance, from a topic that we had under Horizon 2020 that says find solution for de-icing. In an airport context, right? This topic will be about experts in transport, energy, the built environment, biodiversity, because that's also concerning the topic. It's going to bring together people who are working in the public and private sector, researchers, people from academia, but also I think people who are able to liaise with the stakeholders in the cities, right? Such as NGOs, civil society, and so on, because you want to understand not only the vision that these spaces have for themselves, but also what the citizens expect from these spaces. And just as a last remark, and as an example of imperative as why we should join forces on this, there is a network of independent climate scientists working in the Mediterranean, and they recently came out with a report in which they noticed that the Mediterranean area is warming up on average 20% faster than the rest of the world. And I think more than anything, that number should motivate us to act together, to share ideas. I think there is an enormous pool of creativity and technologies on both sides that we should put together to good use. And as a last reminder, this topic, eligibility for the airports and the cities, is restricted to the member states of the European Union and the countries associated to the Horizon 2020 program, of which Israel is a beneficiary and an associated country. So any participant from Israel under this topic, they would be automatically eligible for funding.
Very much, Laura. So you explained to us indeed why this topic is so important, that air traffic and maritime transport is increasing. It's a big factor in the pollution. And on the other hand, we have the technologies there, but we need to bring all the sectors involved together and to create demonstrations in order to increase deployment of those technologies. what we would like to see now for the Israeli audience is how Israel can join in. You mentioned that Israel is a country that the Israeli entities are eligible and very welcome to join this call. And I would like for that to turn to Anat and ask you, Anat, knowing very well the ecosystem of innovation in Israel, where do you see that Israelis can fit into this call and into these activities, both from the point of view of the industry and from the point of view of government initiative, airport authorities, etc.?
Okay, so yeah, Laura did mention that the technologies are already there at some kind of level, and there's clearly a demand for them to be implemented. So Israeli smart mobility again is the movement of people and goods. It has a lot to offer in terms of technologies, in terms of innovative technologies, but in terms of also technologies that could be deployed tomorrow. So if it's electric mobility around new concepts or models, if it's autonomous vehicles with the sensors, the artificial intelligence, the big data and machine learning, if it's the shared mobility about the smart algorithms to actually promote it, and everything about the connected mobility. So there's around 450 startups in smart mobility in Israel. And I must say that despite the corona, in this time, those startups continue to magnetize attention and investments from across the world, which of course is very gives us enables us to see that we're on the map in terms of that Israel has technologies that could help the world. And of course, this is alongside a back chain of strong academic researchers and in everything in electrochemistry, but also other areas of smart mobility. So, for instance, when you look at the airport or a port, and again, not as an isolated island, but as a part of a chain, then there's a lot Israel could offer in terms of how to make it more efficient and sustainable. So, for instance, if we look at the electric mobility or electric transportation, if it's within the port or from the port to the city, so there's new concepts like roads that induct or charge the vehicles, and niches like that are super important because there's no range anxiety and it's very operational friendly. So for instance, if a city like Eilat now in Israel has the new port outside, the new airport outside from the city, I mean, this is like a must to have an electric, some kind of electric transportation, whether it's charges from the road or new concept of charging. But this is exactly a place where technologies like that could be deployed. In addition, transferring the fleets or some of the fleets within the airport, or again bringing shuttles or buses to the airport and from the airport to the city, and turning them into autonomous shuttles and on-demand shuttles, and all of that would make everything more efficient. And again, Israel has strong technologies to support that. So, and at the end of the day, we do see, and we want to see it happening in Israel, and again in other parts of the world with Israeli technologies, is actually transferring those ports or airports into places where there's autonomous on-demand shuttles or autonomous transportation to carry goods and stuff. And we call them, if it's for the people, we call them robotaxis. And we want to see it. We want to see it actually implemented. We think airports are a very good location or a good test site to help this niche grow. So what I want to say is that Israel has a lot of technology. It has a lot of technologies and has all the building blocks actually to promote and to achieve the goals of the EU in terms of the CO2 reduction. Just another point is, and Nili, you asked about from the government point of side, is from the government view. So we have, for the last couple of years, supported strongly the industry and the academy by launching dedicated research centers, by promoting pilots, by promoting different mechanisms to support the startups, both regulatory and also financially. So we have done that, and what we want to take it to the next level is to have big pilots that actually not just show the technology. We've seen the technology, we've seen the innovation, and we hope it could cause an impact. Now we want to have those to push towards big pilots that actually have impact on the mobility, on CO2 reduction, on traffic management, on less traffic congestion, road accident, and all of that. So that's where we're facing now.
Thank you very much on that. So thank you for making this point. We have a lot of technologies in Israel. We need the pilot, we need the areas to experiment them, and that's where it links extremely well with the initiatives of the EU. So I hope we will see Israeli entities applying to these calls and creating cooperation with the European entities. Thank you for that. We have only 4 minutes left to look to take the time and try a little bit to look to the future. So please, just few notes from each one of you. Laura, specifically, I know you are one of the leaders of a mission of the European Commission on climate neutral and smart cities, which includes a specific plan to support systematic transformation of selected cities towards climate neutrality by 2030. This is a very interesting initiative. Could you tell us just in a few words really quickly, where are you looking to, and again, where are the options, hopefully, for Israel to join in and benefit and contribute to this initiative?
Are one of the key novelties under Horizon Europe, and we are looking here really at large scale change. Of course, we continue with the project approach in which we go in and we fix very punctual problems, but we also realize that to meet the 2030 and the 2050 timeline, we need to go for this large scale change where we have clear goals, we have clear monitoring, and we clearly involve the citizens in this process. Because of the nature of climate change and where it is produced, which is mainly in cities, cities seem like a good place to start for a mission. And so our ambition will be to take 100 European cities, give them a time frame of 10 years in which we infuse in them a lot of expertise in terms of governance, a lot of solutions in terms of technology and social innovation, a lot of advice on how to blend funding and financing to finance their transition to climate neutrality. And we expect them to become climate neutral by 2030. In turn, these cities, these 100 cities, will have an obligation to act as lighthouses, let's say, for the rest of the cities in Europe. That would be about 700 cities, and accompany them via twinning, for instance, via twinning mechanisms towards this transition by 2050. So it's very much a little bit the idea that you already find a little bit in its seeds in the topic with airports and ports, because these selected airports and ports would then have an obligation to teach other follower entities to undergo the transition they did. I have to say that the first half of the year for us was very much focused on getting the European concept really solid. Today we published finally the report that explains what we're trying to do, and the second half of the year will be dedicated to finding the exact balance for an international dimension in the mission. And of course, we will have certainly a place for associated countries there, including Israel, just like it was the case for the topic on airports and ports.
Thank you, Laura. And I'll turn quickly to Anat. Which plans you can tell us about from the government in general or from the directorate that you are heading to make Israeli transportation less pollution, have less impact on climate?
So as I mentioned, we're going now into the big projects part. So, for instance, we just, with the Ministry of Energy, we're in the midst of building a network of charging stations across Israel to actually enable faster deployment of electric mobility. We are putting in with the Ministry of Transportation and Ministry of Justice the regulation for autonomous vehicle in place, specifically more for shuttles and for buses, transportation like that, and everything about on-demand transportation, implementing it in different cities. And what I do want to say quickly is that I see this call, the Green Deal, the Accord of Mobility, and Laura, I think you mentioned it as a really good opportunity for Israelis to showcase the technologies with different airports or ports across the world and here in Israel, because those are good beta sites. Those are good sites that will actually, and it doesn't matter if your technology is currently for road use or for whatever, putting it in place, testing it in a destination, in an area like a port or an airport, could really help evaluate and grow the technology. So I really encourage the Israeli companies, but also the Israeli municipalities to actually take a part of this call.
It's too bad that our time is so limited, because it seems like we just started an interesting discussion going on, and we can continue. And we will definitely continue it in various channels. Thank you very much for joining us, Laura and Anat. And I see there are some questions from the audience, which unfortunately we don't have time to answer. Some were answered and some were not, but I invite all of you to turn to ISERD for any replies directly from ISERD, or we will connect you to the right people in the European Commission. So thank you again for joining us, and I would like to encourage you all to go back to the main stage, where Jean-Éric Paquet will give his keynote speech now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.